welcome back to the show. I'm here with Christian Taylor.
Hey, Phil.
Hi, Christian. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. You're lavender.
I'm purpley today.
That's my favorite color.
Very purpley today.
That's my favorite color.
Is it really?
Yeah, not lavender.
Then why don't you ever wear purple?
I have one purple T-shirt, but I feel so conspicuous when I'm wearing it. I just feel like everyone is looking at me saying, "Purple, a bold choice."
Well, if you would wear it more
like
often,
that.
you would get comfortable.
I don't like to draw attention to myself.
How
which
ironic is that?
I produce a podcast. Yes, and Sky Jatandi's not here. It is Sky Free.
No Sky November.
Not Sky Free November. Is it No Sky November?
No Sky November.
No Sky November. He's in. Do we know if he's in?
He's now left South Africa.
Okay.
And he is in India.
Is he there or winging his way?
Or winging his way
he
there.
He has to go through Dubai.
He does.
To get to Mumbai.
That's correct.
Which I think is ironic. But sitting in his chair, we have a special guest. It's Special Guest Week, and our special guest this week is Seth Cohen. Hi, Seth.
Hi, Phil. It's good to be here. Hello, Christian.
Welcome.
Hi, Seth.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Seth is a juggler, and he's going to do some amazing Seth is a longtime friend of Christian. Since you were 16.
Yep.
Yep.
To high school together.
We went to the Stony Brook
you've known
School
each other
together.
about
Ding, ding.
6 years.
Yes. Good math. Good math.
Thank you. You went to Stony Brook together.
Yeah, we did. It's a Christian boarding school in Long Island, New York.
Okay, so we're getting to know Seth this week because Seth and our focus is on Christian education, which we'll get to as we get into this because that's what Seth's area of expertise is. But Seth, I wanted to go through your story quick first. Christian said you were raised Jewish.
Well, I was.
Is this true?
Partly.
You were part Jewish?
I'm half Jewish. This half over here.
Okay.
My father is 100% Russian Jew.
Oh, wow.
And I was born in Brooklyn. We moved out to Long Island when I was very young. My mom's kind of a waspy mix.
Okay.
So we grew up doing a little of everything. But nothing.
How was your mother raised?
A Lutheran background, but
okay.
Not particularly religious.
He went to church one day, a Lutheran church, and his mom said the next day when she took him to the Christian church, just lie and say you're a Christian and that we go to a Lutheran church. That's how it happened.
Are you saying Lutherans aren't Christians?
No. I'm saying...
What was the church he went to on the second? School.
So my start in Christian education happened when, after many rough years in elementary school, my mother lied to the local Christian school. Yeah. And signed statements of faith and said we believed all these things.
Oh, okay.
And she sent me to a Christian school for starting in 9th grade.
So
starting in 7th grade.
So your Christian education started under false premises.
Exactly.
That's fantastic.
Funny how things happen.
And then you went to Wheaton College.
I was blessed to go to Wheaton. I became a Christian my senior year in high school. And
okay.
My wife also graduated from the Stony Brook School, friends with Christian and I.
Oh, cool.
And she also happened to go to Wheaton. So she graduated cum laude from Stony Brook. I graduated, oh lordy. And, but I was a football player, and that was very helpful to get into Wheaton.
In 1984.
They were desperate for half-Jewish football players.
Who could punt snap, yes.
Yeah, the best kind.
So, I was went to Wheaton in 84. And 84 to 88.
Yeah.
And that was a great experience.
Cool. And then you started, right after that, you started working as a house parent at a children's home in Chicago?
Yeah, Northwest Chicago, Lydia Children's Home. It's still there, Lydia Children's Services. They do residential foster care. They do a number of social services.
And did you always want to work with kids?
Or was that just
a job
through
at that
college, I would say my wife and I shared a passion for children in need. That was just something that we've always been very interested in children.
How did you know you had that passion? Where did you first bump into children in need?
Well, being at Wheaton, there was a lot of activities, a lot of things to get involved in.
Yeah.
There were opportunities to go tutor in Cook County Prison. Had an opportunity to sort of be a big brother for Laotian refugee children who had lost fathers, so we were matched up with some boys for an Awanas program. Opportunities to do work behind the Iron Curtain in Romania. There was just a lot opportunities.
When I went to Bible college in Minneapolis, and actually in the distant suburbs of Minneapolis, and our choices, there were more than just two, but the two that I was staring at were you could street witness in downtown Minneapolis, or you could be on the puppet team.
That's
the
right.
puppet team.
2 ministry choices.
There were a couple more. You could do like senior citizen visitation, but no Romania, no, nothing really big. It was
But puppet team was perfect for you.
puppet team. I was like,
All you needed.
I don't even need to read any further down the list. That's why I can't think of any of the others, because I hit puppet team and I was like, I'm done. Cool. And then you went back to Stony Brook, where you had graduated high school and became the associate director of admissions.
So did missions, lived in a dormitory, taught history,
Okay.
did some coaching.
Okay. And then from there, suddenly, you're the assistant head of school of Cornerstone Christian Academy in Philadelphia. Now, was that a inner city school?
Yeah, it was a school started by Tony Campolo and his ministry.
Oh, wow.
Happened to have a chance to meet him, and I was actually originally moving to Philadelphia to kind of try. I was leaving education. I was going to do a PhD in economics at Temple University, and kind of ran into Tony and really fell in love with the idea of Christian inner city education.
Wow. Well, why were you leaving education before you decided to go deeper into education?
We at the Stony Brook School there we had adopted 2 children from the Bronx. We also had birthed one, so at that point, and really wanted to live in the city, wanted to live in a diverse community, and was particularly interested in urban development or redevelopment. That was kind of the area of interest, and but then really found to have an impact in the city through education, and that has really been part of my life now.
And did Tony Campolo play a role in that redirection, or just in here's something specific that you could do?
Well, I think the school there offered me a job that was far beyond my educational level and
Competency?
my age. Yeah.
That's absolutely true. I'm here to verify that.
So, I mean, so at a fairly young age, I was the assistant director of a large inner city Christian school. I was the only white male on staff, all African-American community. So 26, 27 years old, I'm assistant head of the school, and I had gotten my MBA while on Long Island, but I was really moving in different directions. So really learned by just being put in that position, and it was just I loved being in the city. I love that environment, particularly the African-American community. Raised our family there in the city.
Cool. And then you went from there to being the headmaster of one and then 2 different schools?
Yeah, from Tony's school, I went to a school called Spruce Hill Christian School in West Philadelphia. We took over a high school that was faltering. That was at 10th Presbyterian Church in downtown Philly, their high school. And so it's now called the City School, serving more than 300 kids on 3 different campuses in Philadelphia. Wow. And so I did that for, I think, 15 years before moving to the Dominican Republic.
Wow. Okay, so before we get to the Dominican Republic, let's talk about why you do what you do. And I have 3 different questions.
Go ahead.
3 different questions, and I'm going to give them to you all at once. Okay? Why education? Why Christian education? Why inner city Christian education?
Wow.
Start with.
Well, I think I have one answer for all 3. Try to keep it simple.
Wow. Okay. Well, this may be a short show, folks.
So, in Mark chapter 12, Jesus has an encounter with Pharisees. They're trying to trip him up. They're testing him. And a lawyer observes how Jesus has silenced these folks who are trying to trip him up. And he comes at him with one final question. And he says, which is the greatest commandment? Mm-hmm. And Jesus turns to him, and different than other times when they're questioning him, sometimes Jesus will answer a question with a question, or he'll redirect. But this direct question, Jesus answers directly to him. And he says, the greatest command is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. Mm-hmm. The Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and mind. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. And this expert in the law responds to Jesus and says to him, Teacher, you have answered well. it's right that to love God and love your neighbor, it's more important than all the sacrifices. And Jesus' final statement to him then, which is pretty rare, Jesus says to this Pharisee, "You are not far from the kingdom of heaven," which Jesus often doesn't have good things to say to this as a group.
Pharisees don't get a lot of good lines.
Right. So it's an interesting encounter. It's recorded in other Gospels and possibly happened more than once in the timing. And so love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbors yourself. And of course, Jesus is quoting. He's quoting the hero of the New Testament is actually quoting the hero of the Jewish people in the Old Testament. He's quoting Moses. And "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one," is in Hebrew is 6 words. And it's the 6 most precious words of the Jewish people, often referred to as the Shema. And Shema in Hebrew means to hear. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Ehud. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And Moses says this in Deuteronomy 6 to the Israelites, the Jewish people. And it's at the time when he is near the end of his life. They're right at the edge of the promised land. And Moses, it doesn't get to go over after all that's been through.
Right.
And he's instructing the Israelites on how do you pass on the faith. This next generation who did not follow the cloud of fire, the pillar of fire, the cloud by day, did not drink the water out of the rock or the quail or the manna. And so he says, "Hear, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and mind. Write it upon your hearts. Teach it diligently to your children. Talk about it as you rise up, as you lie down, as you go through the day. Bind it upon your hand and your head and on your doorposts." And that's the model for a family. And that's how we pass on the faith. It's through the mundane life of raising children. Raising children's not episodic. You didn't have that one great conversation with the 12-year-old.
All it takes is one good high school retreat.
Yeah, right. That's all solved.
And you're done.
So it's pretty monotonous day in and day out.
Yeah.
And that's the institution of the family. And that's what other institution can also kind of reflect that type of day in and day out schedule and consistency year after year after year, but a school.
Okay.
And I think it's a really good model. And of course, going back to Jesus, Jesus lived out that Shema with his disciples. In Mark chapter 3, it says, "And Jesus chose the 12, and it names them to be with him." And that was how Jesus did it. I mean, the extraordinary work of Jesus was his death and resurrection. And the second extraordinary work was the forming of the 11 who would change the world. And he did it by day in and day out teaching, walking with them, using everyday objects like a fish and a coin and a branch and a fig tree. And that's the model for Christian education.
So how does that shape your approach to... You're a headmaster.
Yeah.
Okay, apply that.
Okay.
What does that look like?
What does that
would
look
be
like?
different than someone else teaching.
First of all, I look for teachers who want to be with them. You have to
Want to be with the kids?
want to be with the kids. And so,
That's a pretty high standard.
now, I'm very clear. I don't want to run a youth group or a summer
Yeah.
camp. Those are wonderful things.
Yeah.
I want to run a serious school.
Yeah.
But the actual structure of a serious school lends itself to living out the Shema. Because if you have your entire staff, your kindergarten teacher and your third grade teacher and the 10th grade English teacher and the soccer coach and the pottery teacher, if everyone is focused not just on the mind of the child, but on their heart, and modeling and being there with them to instruct them and disciple them in the teachings of Jesus, it's a very powerful model. Okay. And in an urban context where maybe families, you're not dealing with families of faith, or you're not dealing with families that are intact enough to have that being in the home, you need that even more. And so I need a staff that loves the hearts of children and will war for the hearts of children. And children live out of their hearts. They live out of their passions. And you have to teach them what to love. And that has to be modeled, not just taught. And that has to be done through relationship. And so that's for me why I love Christian education.
And was that when your first job? It was like, I've got this all figured out. Let me explain to you. I'm teaching the Shema.
No,
how long did that take to develop your philosophy of Christian education?
It was interesting. I had a spiritual mentor. I was trying to grow my school in the inner city of Philadelphia, and I was trying to buy more property. We were full, but we're also serving low-income children. And so having, more students didn't mean more money. More students meant less money because of just the scholarship necessary to make it work. And, I was really challenged by my mentor why I wanted to grow the school. And he challenged me that, if you were to say, Seth, tell me how many kids are in your inner city school. If I said 1,400, you'd say, wow. If I say 220, you'd say, that's nice. Mm-hmm. And his point to me was Jesus only had 11. Mm-hmm. He taught thousands. He healed thousands maybe. But in the end, he had a very small number of men and women who were ready to follow him to the very ends of the earth. Mm-hmm. And he didn't need thousands. He needed just a small group of men and women. And my mentor wanted to know why, am I hitting the ballpark out of the, am I doing it great with 220?
Right.
Why do I need?
Are you going to break it if you go to 1,000?
Right.
And your answer was?
I don't necessarily need more. There was a great need for decent education in the city. And that was standing. It was a good point for me to remember that each child that I have is really important, and it's not necessarily always a numbers game.
Okay.
So this developed over time.
Okay, cool. Because I'm thinking about inner cities, and I've listened to stories on the news, and there have been a lot of stuff like This American Life put 2 or 3 reporters in a Chicago South Side high school for a year because they had in the prior school year they'd had 21 current or former students shot.
Wow.
In the neighborhood. And thinking about the inner city and what appears to be just the collapse of the family. Mm-hmm. What can you do about that? Obviously, it's a huge problem.
Right.
How much can education make up for not having a family?
You obviously cannot replace the family.
Yeah.
However, I don't think there's any other institution poised to do it. I don't think churches are geared in a way to fill that gap.
Right.
Just this morning, I was with Bob Muzikowski at Chicago Hope Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with the school. I would recommend an extraordinary gentleman running inner city Christian high school just off the 290. You can see the scoreboard sign from the road says Hope on it. Oh, okay. And he's got 190 inner city high school kids playing sports and going to college. And it's an extraordinary school, and you'll find these stories. In almost every major city, you'll find these schools that are doing it, and they have structured themselves, and they've hired a staff that are willing to be that whole package for the kids.
Can you? Because I hear getting them to college. If we can get them to college, then we can get them out of poverty, get them to a different. Can you heal families, or can you break the cycle of just completely destroyed family units through education as well, or do you have to model that in a different way?
Well, you have to have if you go to these inner city Christian schools, you will have kids who are living with teachers. You have, teachers who are willing to go post bail, or I don't know how many. In my 14 years at this one school, the city school in Philadelphia, I went to a number of funerals. We lose children, and so they're not all success stories.
Right. And
I've sat in courtrooms where my students have been found guilty for crimes, but some of them do get out. And
what makes the difference? What's the difference between a kid coming in, and ending up in court, or ending up right back where he started, and then someone, and I don't mean, he moved to the suburbs and now he's living an upper middle class lifestyle, but no, he's committed to his family. He's actually changed the course of his family history. How often do you see that, and what do you think makes it? How much is it just a kid wanting a different life versus a teacher really investing in a very special way?
I mean, I think it's a combination of things. And I think one of the things that, as a school, you have to recognize, for instance, at the school in Philadelphia, every teacher had a small group of students they met with 4 times a week for 20 minutes.
Okay. As a group?
Yeah. And so, if you were teaching math, I would assign you a group of 9th graders, and you're going to meet with them this year, and then you're going to meet with them in 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. And even though you have to do lesson plans and test the math, and part of your job description are these 9 boys. These are yours, heart and mind. And over these 4 years, you're going to really get to know them. And at 20 minutes a day, at first it's a little awkward, but over time, you're going to get to know these young men. You're going to get to know their families.
They're little support groups.
Right. And you can't get to the midterm and have that one of your boys have 2 Ds and you're not involved in talking to the mother and finding out what's going on. If that child gets in trouble, you're their advocate. And it just breaks a large group of kids into a small group of kids. And I mean, when I instituted that model, I had teachers say to me, well, I'm here to teach math. I don't want to spend more time with them.
I don't like them that much.
So it's time for you to go. I mean, God's calling you elsewhere. So the whole program it's a relational. I mean, it's a relational industry. I mean, it's all about relationships, and you can even see in the public sector where the whole discipline movement has moved towards restorative practices. It recognizes the power of relationships, and I think that's the key. Are those relationships often building relationship with the home, so that one parent who is fighting in that kid's corner really has a partner in the school and not an adversary.
Okay. And have you seen any really fun success stories
out
of this?
When in Philly we had kids get full scholarships to the University of Pennsylvania. We've got some kids at Wheaton from not just the school in Philadelphia where I was, but now from school in the Dominican Republic. We have. Yeah.
Okay. So does it make you hopeful? The problem is overwhelming.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I'm hopeful because of it's a very much a one at a time thing.
Yeah.
When you step back and you look at the whole landscape of the inner city of Philadelphia or Chicago, I guess I'm not particularly hopeful in that sense. Like, boy,
we really turned that around in 5 years.
Yeah. So, but I do think, I am hopeful for the ability of a small group of kids to make a big difference.
Do you see when in the success stories the kids that really connect with somebody and really want to make a difference? How many of them do you see then returning to their community versus I'm out of here?
Yeah, the kids are from the city; they go back. I
Okay.
mean, that's they're comfortable there. And
so it's not an escape hatch to the suburbs.
I mean, it can be, but I think overall that's where their families are, and that's, I think they go back. They go back to their community.
Okay, so you're not in Philly anymore.
I'm not in Philly.
You were in Philly. You were eating cheesesteaks. You were rooting for the Eagles, and then what happened?
An opportunity came so a number of things happened. My wife and I have 6 children. And we'd been through a lengthy illness with an older child. Just how the American life is with running from thing to thing, and my wife has a small business in Philadelphia and a school and busy life and a terminally ill child. And at some point, we found ourselves really figuring out how do you get off the roller coaster, one which we built ourselves. But somehow we couldn't seem to get off this thing, slow it down. And we were really trying to figure out how to bring some balance back into our lives. And we were pretty tired after this lengthy illness. And opportunity came up. We were asked to look at the school. And I said no to the first person who called me, and then surprisingly, another person called me about the same job. I've never taken Spanish. I'm not particularly enamored with third world living. I actually like living in the city and going to Eagles games and riding the trolley in Starbucks.
Eating cheesesteaks?
Eating cheesesteaks, too many. So, yeah, I have friends from Wheaton who are missionaries, and I think that's awesome. I'll send them a couple bucks every month and have been for 20 years, but God love you. That's great. You just go do that. And I like the city. And this thing caught my heart. And similarly, I found a school that had been there for a very long time that had failed to grasp what does it mean to educate the hearts of children.
Okay. Was this a Christian school?
It's a Christian school, 650 kids, pre-K through 12.
Okay.
Founded as a mission school for missionary kids.
Santiago?
In Santiago.
Santiago.
You can at least say that.
DR?
In the Dominican Republic.
Santiago.
Republic Dominicana. So Santiago is the second largest city in the country.
Okay.
The main city, the capital, is Santo Domingo on the south coast. This is 2 hours north in an area called the Cibao Valley. It's a beautiful, fertile valley surrounded by mountains. The Dominican Republic is a beautiful country from one end to the next. The educational system in the Dominican Republic is horrific. Makes any city here look really quite nice. A large percentage of kids don't go to school.
Okay.
Most go half day. The high schools.
So what are the similarities between the inner city of Philadelphia and Santiago?
That's a good question.
For kids, and then what are the differences?
So I used to work with third world children living in the first world.
Yeah.
Now I work with first world children
Third world.
living in the third world.
First world children living in the third world?
Right, because this is a tuition charging school.
Oh, okay.
And so if you can afford $5,000
Yeah, okay, right.
in the Dominican Republic, you are not living in the barrios.
So you've just flipped everything upside down.
But the needs are the same.
Okay.
Children are underparented, undereducated, underinspired, undernurtured, and they're left to fend for themselves. And their hearts are struggling with what to be passionate about, and what to love. And so I found a very similar situation. So there's more similarities than there are differences.
Lost hurting kids.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are the biggest differences?
Well,
You say. Do they have? What was the role that American culture, pop culture in particular, played in the lives of the kids in inner city Philly? And is there any of that in the DR? Do they know who Miley Cyrus is?
Yes. So, I mean, obviously the youth culture is very, geared towards violence in the inner city and very sexualized. And those same things are very present in the
Really?
DR.
Because they have the internet?
They have internet.
Is that the problem?
Yeah, I mean, and it's just an hour and a half flight from Miami. You have a huge Dominican population living in the New York metro area,
Okay.
as well as in other cities, but particularly in the Northeast, around the New York City area. So you have a lot of back and forth. Our school, about 85% of the students are Dominican, and 10% missionary kids, and maybe another 5% are a mix of kind of business folks.
Okay.
And so for the families who can afford our school, we're really the only English-speaking college preparatory education in the entire region. So we're simply the school of choice. Being in a Catholic culture, they very much embrace our work and the teachings of Jesus and the challenges. We challenge young people to be leaders modeled after
Is
Jesus.
the school Catholic? Was it Catholic?
No, it
by
was founded by
heritage?
missionaries, so it's always
Okay.
been a Christian school.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Different question. Oh, what do you see as the opportunity there? I mean, what are you trying to accomplish that you think you're
Yeah.
uniquely qualified to do?
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know that uniquely well. What has been exciting, when people knew I was going from working with the poor in inner cities to going to work with the affluent, a friend of mine, a former teacher of the Stony Brook School, said to me, well, you can't go there just to use the rich to impact the poor. But my goal is I'm using the poor to impact the rich. Our school has adopted 4 communities around us. We realize that the public educational system is completely useless in our region. Many children don't even go to school. We hired a motorcycle driver, a taxi, to drive every street in and around Santiago. He spent 3 months mapping the entire region. Maybe 1 million people live in and around Santiago. And he traveled with a GPS camera, and he found 122 private schools, many of them faith-based, many of them ridiculously small. And so these are Dominican schools, some Haitian schools that are started by the poor for the poor. And we've come alongside 4 communities, and we're involving our students and their families to really impact those communities. So parents are using their businesses, and this is not necessarily natural for this culture.
Okay.
Dominicans are very generous. They're generous with time, they're generous with their families, but they're not necessarily generous in this way. But our families have really poured themselves into these communities and are excited about their kids being leaders by serving in these communities. And so the other expectations my teachers are then serving in these communities. My business manager is helping these schools organize their businesses. My staff have joined their boards so that they can help structure these schools for success.
Wow.
So,
Cool. And what about your own children?
so I have 3 younger children who are at Santiago Christian School.
Okay.
And
How old are they?
I have a young lady, my daughter Sarah is a senior. She's 17. My son Isaiah is in 10th grade. And then my youngest Deborah is 8 years old.
Okay. And how did they make the transition from inner city Philly to beautiful, lovely?
Yeah. I mean, overall, the transition was not that hard. I mean,
Okay.
Santiago's safer than West Philadelphia, and the people are nicer and less violent. Though it is a transition. My daughter coming into 9th grade, that was a tough transition.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But they've done really well. And similarly, raising children in the inner city has provided great perspective for those children. My daughter, who was raised in the city, is also now bilingual and has lived in Santiago. And as a young lady who's about to go to college, 17 turning 18, I think she has a life experience, having perspective, having grown up with adopted siblings, cross-racially, internationally. I think she's, very well prepared.
Has that affected her interests in what she wants to pursue in college?
Yeah, she's really interested in international relations
Okay.
and issues of justice. The DR has
There you go.
the Dominican Republic, I think, is 4th in the world of sex trafficking children, and a lot of other issues that really needs the engagement of our young people to take these kinds of things on.
Okay, here's a completely different question. In the U.S. and mostly in the U.S., maybe in Europe as well, there's a growing hostility towards the idea of public funding helping faith-based education. A notion that religious indoctrination has been considered a good thing in the past, and we need to throw away that idea because obviously it's a terrible thing. As an educator, how do you respond? Do you bump into, I don't know if this was the case in Philly, but just the notion of, wait a minute, you're doing religious indoctrination and, you maybe want public funds in some way or another? How do you justify that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the school choice movement, I do hope grows in the area of education. I do think most of Western Europe, many places in Canada, Australia, all schools are public schools. There are privately run public schools and there are government-run public schools, but education is a public function. And it's the choice of parents. You can choose a Jewish school or a Muslim school or a Christian school or a secular school. But education, the curriculum is a state-mandated curriculum, and education is a function of the state. And so I think that model works. And I think
What would you argue is the benefit of a faith component to a kid's education?
Well, I mean,
If you're talking with a critic, with a skeptic who says, just teach them math, science, and technology, and stop messing with their minds.
Yeah, I mean, education is never neutral, is value neutral, and so as I referenced before, I do think kids, we live out of our hearts. We live out of things that we're passionate for. And you have to teach kids values. You have to teach them kindness and sharing. And for us as Christians, that looks like the fruits of the Spirit. But I think those are the same principles that can cross.
But but can't you do that without going into any supernatural, funny business? Because then they'll come out thinking that they, can't believe in evolution and the dinosaurs were fake and that we didn't land on the moon or something about global warming. They'll go crazy and turn
that's
into
where
knuckleheads.
But I do think that's where the school choice movement is.
So you think it's up to the parents?
Yeah, I think
to decide whether their kids should turn into knuckleheads, religious knuckleheads.
Yeah, I think that's a good model.
At some point, doesn't this? Have you heard? I mean, there are actually atheist authors who believe religious education of children should be classified as child abuse if the parents are forcing their kids. I don't know if you've ever bumped into.
I haven't. I have it when I was here in the States, and I have to be honest. I don't follow news and politics as much as I used to here. As now that I'm in the Dominican Republic, now and then someone will say, "Did you see what happened?" And I'll be like, "No."
Yeah. I was just interacting.
I bet that feels kind of freeing, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when I do come back and someone asks me, "What do you think about such and such?" and I really am
clueless.
I'm really kind of removed from it.
Okay.
And it's not that I don't. I mean, the internet's accessible, and it's more of just a choice I've chosen not to engage.
Is that part of the treadmill or the roller coaster that you're trying to step away from?
Yeah, I mean, leaving the U.S., which is a time-oriented culture, and entering the Dominican Republic, which is relationally oriented, has been the greatest part of the move.
Okay.
When you're in a culture where people actually care when they ask you, "How are you?" has been revolutionary.
They do.
And if you ask them how they are, they're going to tell you, and then you're going to pray together.
You would not like it there.
It's freaky.
It's very.
He was saying on the way over here, we stopped to eat, and he looked around and said, "You can throw a stone and find another place to eat." And it was interesting just to hear his sort of view of things after not being here for a while.
How long have you been down there?
This is my 4th year in the DR.
Okay. And that's all it took to just wipe the America right out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I do vote. I can vote absentee, but I'm going to have to really re-engage here soon.
Yeah.
And try to.
So, have any Christmas sales begun yet in the Dominican Republic?
Well, it's interesting. In the DR, they don't celebrate Halloween or Thanksgiving. So Christmas starts very early there.
Okay.
So you'll
with Santa Claus trying to get you to buy a Mercedes like it does here?
Maybe not quite.
Okay.
But in the stores and things, lights are out in September. So Christmas,
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Christmas starts pretty early in the DR.
Okay, so I guess
It's going to be starting in September here soon.
Yeah.
I mean, I notice every year
it's... the November 1st, I think, was the first Santa wants you to buy a Mercedes commercial.
And I saw decorations up in October for Christmas.
Okay.
Holiday decorations.
I want to talk briefly about Hannah.
Okay.
And I wanted to talk about her in a specific context. You adopted your daughter Hannah. Is that your phone?
It's not mine.
Is that your phone?
We have a guest. We forgot to tell him to turn off his phone.
Okay. Yeah. See if you get invited back. How old was Hannah when you adopted her?
Hannah came to us as a foster child from the Bronx when she was 3 months old.
3 months old? Mm-hmm. Okay. And then at some point, how old was she when you got a really bad diagnosis?
So Hannah came to us in 3 months. Her younger brother came to us then 8 months later when he was a newborn. We adopted them when, I think the adoption finally went through when they were 4 or 5.
Okay.
And when she was 11, my wife was visiting the doctor for my other child's ear and mentioned to the doctor that Hannah had some shortness of breath. Mm-hmm. And within 12 hours, we had this diagnosis of a terminal illness of primary pulmonary hypertension. And she was given a 50% chance of 12 months.
Wow.
So then she was 11. So that came as a pretty big shock.
Yeah, that's a pretty big shock. And how long did she live?
She lived about 5.5 years. We had a pretty good run overall.
Okay, so 16 and a half,
Yeah.
going on 17?
Yeah.
Wow. And how long ago was that she passed
She'd
away?
be 23, so it's, I think,
Okay.
a little more than 6. I guess it'll be 7 years in February.
Okay, so that's a pretty impacting event for
Yeah,
a family.
family.
So, and the reason I wanted to discuss that, because there are lots of stories like that, and lots of people get bad diagnoses at some point in your life.
Right.
Maybe when you're 70, it may be when you're 80, or it may be when you're 10. You really don't know. But we've been looking at the story of Brittany Maynard, and I asked you if you were familiar with it, or if
I
you,
did look it up.
Okay. So if we don't know, Brittany Maynard was diagnosed. She had just been married. She was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. A diagnosis left her with 6 months to live, was the estimate. She was about to enter a period of suffering and horrible seizures while losing grasp of everything she once knew. Doctors told her in April of 2014 that she only had weeks to live, or only had weeks remaining during which she could be on her feet, and soon she would be bedridden. So she went and did a bunch of traveling and a bunch of adventures and went to the Grand Canyon, and then on November 1st took her own life, moved to Oregon so that they could take advantage of death with dignity or assisted suicide rules. And ended her life on November 1st. And it's set off kind of a firestorm of
Right.
what does everybody think about that? And people are just all over the map. People saying, oh, that's the way it should be. She went out, and there's pictures of her literally the week before she died at the Grand Canyon, as a tourist.
Right.
And so a lot of people have been very defensive of her choice. Like, it was her choice. Right. Everyone should have the right to make that choice. And there have been people. So for example, one column written by a guy who said he wished his wife had made the same choice, because she had a terminal illness, and she just rode it all the way to the end. And he said the last week of her life left him with such scarring memories that he wishes she had done what Brittany Maynard had done. One mom wrote a column who had a Down syndrome child who said, I'm really concerned about the direction this is going in, with the pro-choice movement saying you should be able to select for things like Down syndrome and terminate your child. And her point was, well, it's only a matter of time till, the right to death argument starts to look at disabilities,
option.
So the fear of a slippery slope.
slope.
So I guess my question for you is, what did you experience after that diagnosis, that would shape your thoughts about, if you know you have a bad diagnosis, should you just turn it off?
Yeah. I was talking with my son, Josiah, who's a senior at Wheaton, and he's taking a philosophy course with Dr. Talbot at Wheaton College, not a professor I knew. And Dr. Talbot had, in teaching, was talking about the wisest people are in touch with reality. And to be honest, Phil, you're dying, right? I mean, you're a little closer to death than when we started the program.
Some days more so than others.
Thanks, Seth.
Yeah.
That's real sweet of you.
I just wanted to give that good news to you before I go. But I have to say that Hannah's diagnosis was obviously a shock. And it just, all of a sudden you're reeling. But throughout that, with the other children, we did find ourselves talking about heaven. In our family, we started referring to it as the big house. We'll see at the big house. And we didn't know really who was going to go to the big house first. And even though Hannah was terminally ill, any other catastrophe or thing could have happened that could have brought one of us there ahead of Hannah. And so we didn't know. And I think Hannah developed a real wisdom.
How did she spend, her last few years? What did she want to do?
Well, we definitely tried to, we had different medical choices to make throughout the process. Do we try this? Do we try that? And, how long do you go? At what point do you
Stop trying.
stop trying? And when we let quality of life, because quantity isn't the only measurement,
Right.
there was a sense of quality of life. And from November to February, her last year, was fairly miserable. I mean, she suffered greatly.
Okay.
And for my younger children, they have real memories of that. And so
Memories that they wish they didn't have?
or just that's how they viewed her. I mean, that's just what they remember, and it sort of became our new normal.
Yeah.
It was interesting that when she actually did die, my youngest son Isaiah was surprised, and felt almost like we hadn't told him. Meanwhile, I mean, our house, you should have seen the amount of medical equipment, and I mean, it's really astounding what we had in our house, and living near Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which provided tremendous care. We were in and out of there all the time. Hannah spent weeks and weeks sometimes there. And we would have Thanksgiving dinner at Children's Hospital, and kids would go up and play.
How did her knowing, that the end was coming change her personally?
Well, one of the things I shared a thing about Dr. Talbot was Hannah had a real understanding of life and death, and would ask questions about heaven, and would ask questions about. She would ask her pastor, "What does it feel like to die?" Or what do you think heaven's like? And she wanted to know, and it was her reality, and it's our reality. And so, like on a second level, our family kind of lived through that as well. We would read books together, and they were very helpful to me, even if they were children's books, just thinking about, what is heaven. And as a parent, I sort of feel like I live with one foot there. I'm ready to go.
Right.
Well, and she did things too that influenced. Like I remember, she really wanted you to adopt another child,
Yeah.
and that really impacted your family. Share that.
Well, one night Deborah woke up, and sometimes she would wake up in the night and she would come in and
mean
wake us.
Hannah?
Hannah, what did I say?
Deborah.
Sorry. I'll throw the dog's name in there too a little later on. But Hannah came in and just said God told her that we're to adopt another little girl so that when she goes to heaven, Sarah will have a sister. And Sarah and Hannah shared a room together. And Hannah didn't. I adopted two, I birthed two. Well, my wife birthed two. And then adopted two more. But at that point, Isaiah was number 5 through Bethany Christian Services, and we were just about to adopt a 6th child, or adopt our 4th adoptive child, when Hannah got sick. And so obviously, the original diagnosis was a 50% chance, 12 months, so we put it on hold, and let's kind of bear down again and get through this. And it obviously dragged on in a good way. So we had never reactivated our file with Bethany, and the kids didn't necessarily know that, but Hannah just kept pushing. She really believed God wanted us. A couple weeks later, she told us that she knows the name of the baby. I'm like, what baby? So the one we're going to adopt. It's going to be Deborah. And so I took her to visit Bethany Christian Services, and literally, Phil, it was every morning I would check to see if she was still breathing when I left for work, because she could go at any time. And I took her to meet the head of Bethany in our region, a wonderful guy who had worked with us for the previous adoption. And he met with Hannah, told her, remember when you adopted Isaiah, we did this, here's the paperwork, gave her all. Hannah came home with all the paperwork, gave it to Ann, my wife, and thought we were doing it. And we were just playing her because the next flu is going to take her.
Right.
And so she stopped talking about it for a couple of months. And then one night at dinner, she said, Mom, when's the baby coming? The other kid's like, what baby? What are you doing? So we're like, well, honey, and then she knew. She was like, oh, she knew we had just dragged it out. I mean, she was very upset with us. And just continued to say that God wanted us to adopt. And so this guy from Bethany Christian Services called me to say he was meeting with a donor. Could he show our Christmas picture to this donor? Because they're asking him to help fund cross-racial adoptions, and because of privacy rules. And I said, sure. Called me a couple of days later to say the donor is going to fund one cross-racial adoption a year, but he wants to know if your family wants a baby, he'd like you to be their first fully funded cross-racial adoption. And so That was probably early in the fall, and Deborah was born on November 16th, and she came home on December 23rd. And so Hannah had a whole year with her,
Wow.
a little over a year, and that was very special.
Wow, I bet.
And
I
before
bet.
she died, so.
So what do you get concerned when you look at the story of Brittany Maynard?
Well, one thing, I mean, it becomes entertainment, which is always concerning that these very personal...
That the story itself
Yeah.
in the news media has become entertainment.
Yeah, so that has to be...
Yeah.
That's a concern.
Do you think there's a devaluing? Here's what somebody wrote on it that I thought was interesting. If my computer will wake up and show me a picture.
Did it die?
Oh, here we
there
go.
we go.
Here we go. Maynard made the choice because life, as the way she wanted to experience it, should have been full of youth, vigor, beauty, and love, not pain, suffering, and a gradual wasting away of her mind and body.
Wow.
But to the physicians arguing against the law, dignity meant embracing the fact that life's value wasn't only found in beauty, youth, and independence.
Yeah.
Things our society values so much. Life itself was dignity, they claimed, even if it meant becoming deteriorated, old, and dependent.
Wow.
So, which really
Yeah.
struck me that's basically what happened to her was the condensing of what happens to everyone.
Of course.
It's like over the next 6 months, you're going to get old and die. You're going to get old and fall apart.
Right.
You're not going to be pretty anymore. You're not going to be independent. You're not going to be entirely functional. Is that okay?
Right. It should be okay.
Just say no, that's not okay. I'm going to put together my bucket list. It almost feels like it almost, we'd rather be James Dean. We'd rather burn out than just fade away. We want to go out with a bang after a big party. And so my concern, and I don't want to say anything critical of her directly. My concern is, though, if there's a part of our culture that starts to look at aging as not the way it's supposed to be, and something, it's better off to just be dead than to be old and unattractive,
Sure.
and not very functional.
Well, I mean, just from my own experience, Hannah's illness and her simple faith, childlike faith that carried her, had a wider impact.
Mm-hmm.
The one, besides family members, her first grade teacher had a huge impact on Hannah when she was in that teacher's first grade classroom. This is before she was sick. And after Hannah got sick, this was one of the few people who could be with Hannah when she felt poorly. This was someone who really walked with her. And her name, Jean Landis. And Jean went back to Penn, got a doctorate, taught at Eastern University. And about 2 years before Hannah died, Jean came down with lymphoma. And Jean shared at Hannah's funeral how actually Hannah became her teacher. And one day, one of her Sunday school teacher, Hannah's Sunday school teacher, gave her a frog when she was first diagnosed, which stood for fully rely on God. And Hannah began giving frogs to Jean.
Stuffed frog
A
or
little
a
stuffed- a
live
little stuffed frog.
Okay. and try to take care of this frog
Right.
while you're doing it.
So, Jean will share how Hannah became her teacher. And Hannah really walked with Jean, and Jean walked together. And Jean watched Hannah pretty much waste away there at the end. And then Jean died, and they're buried side by side in a cemetery outside of Philadelphia.
Wow.
And right in between them is this this little iron statue of a frog. And I have to say that God really used Hannah's suffering for others, but at the same time, God was faithful to Hannah and met her needs through right up until the end. So I mean, there is dignity in that,
Right,
even as
right.
she couldn't lay down anymore because the size of her heart had grown so large. She had to sleep horizontal, and she couldn't eat, and she just life was very hard. Those last 6 months were very, very hard. 5 months were just very, very difficult.
And did she ever want to go sooner?
what was interesting, Hannah was sad she was dying,
Okay.
but and those and at the last moments when she was bleeding internally and really drowning in her blood and dying, those closing 30 minutes, she was fearful. But for the most part, she wasn't afraid to die. She had real confidence in that where she was going, and so, God didn't use her as a pawn to help others,
Right,
and
right.
you always sacrifice a pawn to get the game going, and
But I've known numerous kids with serious illnesses that have just done extraordinary things. Whether it's raising money for other kids or ministering to other kids. So, I think I'm mostly concerned about the notion that if there's suffering in your future,
Just end it.
opt out.
yeah.
This is an old story, actually, and we share sort of a common experience where in our own high school, this is back in 1984, this topic was a hot one. There was a play written called Whose Life Is It Anyway? Do you remember that? So that was where this woman, was paralyzed from the neck down and was requesting the right to die. And it was a movie. I think Richard Dreyfuss did it, and then this play. And we were cast in this play together in this Christian high school. I was the patient, and he was the doctor. And our director told us this is something that happens often, and he would bring in articles of football players that would end up paralyzed, trying to bring it home to us to show us, what it was. And this was a Christian school, and our perspective on doing this play was, this is a question that's out there. What is the Christian response to this? And I'll never forget, this was 2 days before opening night. You want to tell that part?
Yeah, so there was a JV football game. I was varsity. We walked over on Monday. The game was on Saturday. The JV played on Monday, and then the play opened that Thursday night. And this young man in ninth grade, Buddy Pierce, on a punt, dropped his head into a tackle and was paralyzed from the neck down on our football field. And we were so literally this play's about to open 2 days after Buddy was paralyzed from the neck down.
And our high school is only 350 kids. It shocked the community, and I think the teachers were very concerned because at the end, she's granted the right to die. And so the board got together, everybody got together talking about should we even put this play on. And, I'll never forget, I had spent months studying this play and preparing for this role where I would lay in a bed for 3 hours without moving. And I put so much into this. This was my senior year, and it was about ready to be canceled. And I was in tears, that my play was going to be canceled. And also worried about this friend. It was just this conflicting emotion. And the director, Neil Aiken, said to me one day, he said, "Christian, have you worked hard with this?" "Yes." "Have you learned anything?" "Yeah, I've learned a ton." "Then why does anyone need to see it?" It's this very impactful moment. And the parents of Buddy decided to go ahead and have the play go on. But then the teachers, and this goes back to what Seth was talking about before, the school empowered the teachers to talk about this play in their classes and what different responses are and why the Christian response to that is so different and what the value of life is living even in those dire circumstances. And for that whole community, it was an incredibly transformative time. I mean, there was just, for the rest of that year and even on, Buddy lived until about 3 years ago.
Wow.
And that's a long time. We graduated 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So he lived 25 years after that, and his impact on people's lives was vast over that time.
It seems like many of the people who have the most impact on us are the ones that some people are considering, well, wouldn't they have been happier not living?
Yeah.
And whether it's people who have kids with Down syndrome, who are so offended at the notion that, you'd be better off not having been born.
Right.
When they say, well, this kid brings me joy every single day of my life, and you're telling me I should have made a different choice.
I think it's the quintessential God taking things that are broken and that we toss away and making them into beautiful, amazing
Well,
things.
it's the first becoming last. It's we're strongest when we're weak. It's
Foolish things.
Yes, the foolish things, teaching the wise. It's everything that is upside down about God's economy that doesn't fit into what our culture says you really want in life. It's about what is the good life.
Yeah.
What is the good life? Well, the good life is when you can go to, you can go on trips, you can dance, you look good in a dress, everything. The world is your oyster. That's the good life. And then God's economy says, no, that's crap.
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree.
Won't last.
I don't know how I can possibly say this.
I think it should be a thoughtful one.
It's thoughtful songs without any thought.
That's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it?
It is. Oh, Seth, thanks for coming. I'm singing a song I should be humming because I've got to come up with words to sum up what we've said. I'm so happy that you're here and so happy that your head is full of love for the kids of the DR. I wish I was playing my guitar because it's a little bigger than a ukulele, but that's okay anyway. I'm glad you came lately, and I'm glad your son's at the same college as mine. And maybe they can meet each other and tell stories and go minister to kids too. Okay.
Very nice.
That was just a little song because it's kind of a serious day.
My kids
on the
grew up
podcast.
with, the Veggie Tales.
Vegetables?
So,
Yeah.
it's...
the vegetables. Well, Seth, thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
It's nice to have you on the podcast.
I'm honored to be here, Phil.
And have a great time back in the DR.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, wait. And if anybody wants...
How do people help you?
If you go to our website, SantiagoChristianSchool.org,
Yes.
there are links there for the partner schools. We're dealing with Haitian children who are in desperate situations, Dominican children living in very, very poor circumstances, and there's ways to help those schools.
What's the URL again?
SantiagoChristianSchool.org.
And he's looking for good teachers, too.
Okay. Always looking for great
If
teachers.
you want to get away from a little further from Miley Cyrus, maybe you should go teach in the DR.
And the winters are amazing.
Really?
85 degrees.
Amazingly cold and
85 degrees with a breeze, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful country.
I'm going home with him.
Okay. See you next week.
Bye, everybody.